At times, I find myself pondering how life manages to become so intricate. The rapidity with which things can get out of hand is what really gets to me. However, what you have heard up to this point is really the tip of the iceberg. I have something embarrassing to confess. This is my admission. Greetings. I am Chloe. I am 28 years old. She claims to be experiencing her second spring, my mom Evelyn. To be honest, I could see her point. I felt like a piece of myself crumbled when she wed Samuel. A man like him is hard to come by. Hey there, Samuel. He seems unaffected by the passage of time, although being 55 years old. When he enters a room, everyone looks at him since he seems so youthful. He brings joy to my mom and is charming and well-educated. At least according to her, that is the case. However, let me explain. Sometimes appearances can be deceiving. Mom left the house in a flash this morning for an important meeting at work. Personally, I was scrambling to find an appropriate outfit for an upcoming presentation. I decided on a miniskirt in black. Beautifully uncomplicated. I went to put it on, but then I noticed the zipper was stuck. It still wouldn't budge no matter how much I pulled. I first dismissed it as insignificant, but the more I tugged on that zipper, the more obstinate it became. Next thing I knew, Samuel strode past my door. We locked gazes. Do you require assistance? With a steady but determined tone, he inquired. I almost went into shock. There shouldn't be any difficulty in accepting a request for assistance, does there? Didn't feel easy in the least. Something changed afterwards. Without hesitating, Samuel approached the zipper and began to examine it. I felt a surge of emotion as his fingers lightly touched my back. The intensity and complexity of such a seemingly insignificant event defies explanation. Although it was only the beginning. Why? Because the truth is what follows is the start. I am unable to conceal it from you under any circumstances. Are you prepared? Reason being, this isn't your run-of-the-mill narrative. It's about a confession that begs for attention without saying a word, muddled feelings and unclear boundaries. Subscribing and enabling notifications will ensure that you hear more articles similar to this one. This would be absolutely incredible for me. Standing behind me, Samuel seemed as close as a breath to brush against my back. I stood there, nervous and holding my breath, as his fingers delicately ran over the zipper. Everything seemed to have shrunk to the size of Samuel's fingertips, as if the air in the room had grown thicker. He spoke in a low, gravelly voice that this is very stuck. His hands were so hot that I could feel their warmth into my flesh. Whenever his fingers made contact with the zipper, an unpleasant sensation surged through me. He mumbled something about how I should probably be more cautious, but I refrained from even looking at him. My voice would betray me if I attempted to talk, so I swallowed hard. Subsequently, I sensed his approach. His fingers tightened their grip on the zipper, and his breath was so near that it nearly touched the nape of my neck. My chest felt like it was going to explode from the intense beating of my heart. As if this were the only moment in time, it felt like it would go on indefinitely. Afterwards, an unforeseen event transpired. Samuel briefly halted his motion, and I could hear the metallic sound of the zipper sliding. I believe he got halfway through his thought when the zipper gave way. Everything transpired in the blink of an eye. It was as if time stood still as my miniskirt slid down my body, revealing my ankles. I was unable to exhale. It seemed as if my entire being was aflame. I halted in my tracks as my hands instinctively went to raise it again. Even Samuel seemed to freeze. I was aware that he was staring at me, but I refrained from turning around. The eerie stillness was so pervasive that I thought I could hear nothing but the sound of my own heart racing. His voice was trembling, almost remorseful as he murmured to Chloe. My cheeks were on fire. Ultimately, he apologized. His voice is now clearer and less agitated. He retreated and I could feel it. That was completely unintentional on my part. Who am I, though? What should I say? I was at a loss. The words refused to come out of my mouth. Despite my best efforts, my hands shook as I knelt to retrieve my skirt. In an effort to alleviate the uncomfortable situation, I patiently awaited his next words. It appeared like he was equally paralyzed as I was. It seemed as if I were in a dream. The gravity of the situation was so great. However, it also included an undeniable truth that I couldn't turn a blind eye to. Something I was prepared to deal with head-on. Turning and leaving the room silently, Samuel never spoke another word. Standing there in his utter stillness, I felt as if I had frozen in place. Despite my trembling hands, I seized my skirt and rose to my feet. My pulse was pounding. My breathing is awkward. His breath echoed on my skin as I glanced around the room. I changed into a different skirt that I had found. However, the modification was more involved than that. I felt a mix of embarrassment and bewilderment whenever I glanced in the mirror. Anxieties and joy were fighting for control of my emotions. It was merely an accident, I told myself over and over again. The irresistible allure of that instant, nonetheless, lingered with me. I hurried to get to the presentation as quickly as possible, as if I could put the past in the past. No matter how much I attempted to maintain composure, the tempest within never left my side. I responded to inquiries. Smiling, I looked about. However, the events that transpired in that room refused to leave my thoughts. My mind was still in a whirlwind when I returned home. I could hear the kitchen's clink of silverware and plates as I entered the house. With stealth, I made my way to the door and peered inside. At the head of the dining table sat Mom, Evelyn, and Samuel. My heart stopped beating the second I laid eyes on Samuel's face. We locked gazes. Something intense, inexplicable was staring back at me from his eyes. It felt as if he shared my feelings of disorientation and unease. However, I was unable to remain motionless for any longer. I am not expecting food. I fled from my chamber, muttering under my breath. My mother never got the chance to ask a question since my voice came out raspy. After closing the door, I paused to inhale deeply. I could feel a shift in the air. All it took was a single misunderstanding for that awkward moment to happen. It did, however, seem to mark a turning point in our relationship. After this, everything would change. I felt an even stronger combination of thrill and guilt as a result of that idea. Reconciling with Samuel was a nightmare for me. But you know what's scariest? Some small part of me was curious about the possible nature of this beginning. I avoided making eye contact with anyone in the home for 2 entire days, attempting to hide the overwhelming sense of Samuel and Mom's presence while pretending as if nothing occurred. I couldn't handle it. I was trying to avoid them so badly that I would sneak out of the kitchen as soon as I could, even if it was only to get something. I couldn't even muster the courage to meet their gaze. My mind was in utter disarray. I felt like I could breathe easier the more away I remained. But after that night, Samuel's presence in the kitchen was certain to happen. Even though everyone else was already asleep, I stayed up late in the kitchen making breakfast for myself. The door swung open with a squeak, and Samuel's figure materialized in the fading light. Time seemed to stand still as our gazes met in an instant. Our eyes merged into one another, and the gravity of the situation crushed me no matter how much I tried to avoid it. For what seemed like an age, but was probably just 10 seconds, we stood there staring at each other in quiet, and I held my breath. I was intimately connected to him in a manner that words fail me to describe. I was confused about my emotions. Excuse me, I was just passing by. Likewise, he was. Silence was our companion. Exactly 0. Silence, though, conveyed more than any amount of words could have. We then turned and silently departed, as if we had both grasped an unspoken understanding. Night after night, this subtle interchange transpired once more. We used to simply stare at each other whenever we crossed paths in the kitchen. We were both too scared to say a word. Even when it seemed like we would finally break the ice, we would always act as if nothing had to be said. We learned to communicate with one another solely through the stillness. Suddenly, that fateful evening, everything shifted. Everything finally broke down when Chloe returned home inebriated from a party. My trembling hands and blurry eyes conveyed my state of mind as I limped through the door. I was on the verge of going insane. I could no longer contain myself in the face of the night's disorder and the unresolved tension stemming from Samuel's touch. I knew that night that my life would never be the same. My voice cracked as I fumbled with the keys, my pulse racing. My vision was hazy and disoriented due to the effects of the drinking. It seemed as if the door had already opened before I had a chance to insert the key. Samuel stood there in the dappled light, glistening as if he had been anticipating my arrival, his gaze fixed on mine. A tentative stride forward was all it took for me to lose my footing. Suddenly, I was in a free fall and slammed into Samuel's chest. It seemed as if the universe had vanished at that very second. His presence was so palpable that my heart began to race. Samuel remained silent. As he helped me up the stairs to my room, he simply grabbed onto me and steadied me. A part of me seemed to fall apart with each stride. My already jumbled feelings were further complicated by the intensity of our intimacy. "Don't utter a word," I whispered, my voice quivering with each word. My whole being seemed to be on the verge of exploding as Samuel led me to my room, and the door closed behind us. At that very time, my thoughts were completely clouded. There was this void inside of me, but being with Samuel brought a peculiar serenity. The distance between us began to gradually fade away. I thought I could hear my own heartbeat from how close we were. I knew then that things were about to shift. I was completely overwhelmed. Feelings of dread, excitement, guilt, and perhaps even one are whirling around inside of me. Samuel drew near, his hands delicately covering my face. I had no idea how he was feeling, but what about me? It was hard to say anything. The anarchy within me washed over my entire being as I stood there motionless, allowing his hands to cradle me. I tried to describe what was occurring, but the words wouldn't come out of my mouth. "Chloe," he said as if speaking to me alone. It was as if the cloud of uncertainty over my eyes lifted at that very moment. "I need you to express your emotions to me." I went completely still. I was unable to dispel the internal confusion. In the end, I was at a loss for words. Amidst all the chaos, all I desired was to hear his voice and be held by him. I couldn't make sense of it all since it was so strong and overwhelming. As my emotions swirled around him, I could only gaze at him. My heart was beating as I stared into Samuel's eyes. Neither my thoughts nor my feelings could be sorted out. At last, the bravery to speak up finally came to me. I exploded into tears as I locked eyes with him. "Samuel, I am your stepfather. I'm aware that I shouldn't be experiencing these emotions, but I am." My zipper came undone and my skirt slipped down that fateful day. It was a meaningful experience for me. Still, the thought keeps resurfacing in my mind. You weren't even close. And yes, I was affected by it. It has remained my obsession ever since. Before continuing, I swallowed forcefully and waited. Because of this, I insisted that my buddies bring me to the party. I drank myself silly, naively believing it had aided my forgetfulness. Guess what though? Nothing happened. Actually, it exacerbated the problem. The void within me just intensified. I can't even recall how I made it home, I was that drunk. The air was thick with stillness. I tried to avert my gaze, but engaging in conversation with him required me to meet his gaze directly. "You unlocked the door after that. Recall that I stumbled straight into you?" At that moment the tide turned. "Samuel, I am completely confused about what comes next." The question, "What's going to happen?" came out of my fickle voice. I waited for him to respond, my jaw clenched. As he gazed at me, Samuel drew in a breath, his eyes betraying his uncertainty, saying, "I'm feeling the same way, Chloe." He spoke slowly but with emotion. I can't believe it, but a little crack appeared in his voice. Evidently, he was unsure of himself and his words. We were both entangled in a web of chaos, and all I could do was try to face it. At that same time, I chose to remain silent. In the face of the fact that things had grown more complex, managing all of my emotions, it was overwhelming. I remained motionless throughout. The last words that Samuel spoke resounded in my mind. However, though, I understood his meaning perfectly. Ahead of time, I had no clue what to do. Did something new start here? Or was this the last chapter? My heartbeat could be heard in the eerily silent room. Samuel seemed to be hesitating. Additionally, yet, the tug. We were both experiencing it, but we lacked the background knowledge to really comprehend it. The time had slipped away. By this point, Evelyn had slept off. In that instant, it seemed as if every obstacle and worry had vanished. My internal state of disarray and anxiety was becoming worse by the second. I felt myself drawing nearer to Samuel all of a sudden. Standing there, I faced all of my emotions head-on with my eyes closed. I was confused, but I did know one thing. I was determined not to let that second go away. My heart was pounding as I delicately extended my hand toward Samuel's. Afterwards, I leaned in unconsciously. Just one more stride and our lips met. That initial kiss. It was as though the whole world changed in a flash. What I was doing was completely oblivious to me. All I did was give in to my emotions. I felt like everything else faded away when Samuel embraced me. Nothing else was significant at that time. Uncertain of what was ahead, all I desired was to be at his side. To be honest, that was my main concern. But at that precise second, the here and now was all that counted. We were both unable to resist that night. I had to battle my emotions as everything became entangled. However, I ultimately desired to be there for that moment regardless of the cost. Fear gripped me for sure. A sense of liberation yet was also there. It was as if we shared an indescribable bond with you. Almost there. It was as if that crimson mini dress were a metaphor for life. The following morning, I found it lying on the floor with the remainder of my clothing after removing it that night. I skipped taking them up since we were in such a state of disarray. I became engrossed in that moment, which was overwhelming and chaotic. When it was over, I just wanted to go to bed and sleep it off. Everything would never be the same after that morning. So peaceful, the house was deserted. I rose slowly and showered. It seemed as if the water had cleansed the chaos within me, as if it could wash away any and all obstacles. My thoughts were racing as I stood alone in the shower, but I also felt a small sense of calm. I stepped outside and pretended everything was fine. Upon returning to my room, I couldn't help but notice the red mini dress. Then it hit me, I totally hadn't worn it. Yet there it was. My face contorted into a smile. Even though everything else had crumbled, the outfit seemed familiar after all that had happened. To symbolize rearranging things, I chose to put it on once more. No problems at all this time when I cautiously pulled the zipper up. Every detail was perfectly in place. I decided then and there to keep going ahead. Both the changes and my readiness to start a new chapter in my life were crystal clear to me. Nothing could stop me after I tried on the dress and realized it was a wonderful fit. I pray my tale was entertaining to you. It has been an incredible experience to share this thrilling trip with you. Please subscribe if you would like to receive such stories in the future. Make sure you don't miss an episode by turning on alerts. Also, I really appreciate your feedback in the form of likes and comments. I am truly inspired to persevere after listening to your sentiments and ideas. I am inspired to write more and more by your support. With that, I will leave you and see you in the next story. Thank you so much.